The happiest day of my life almost became the day they buried my name. I had just walked out of the church with my new wife when my boss's son texted me, "You're fired. Consider it my wedding gift." No warning, no meeting, just a cruel little message timed to make sure I felt small in front of everyone I loved. And when I showed it to Maura, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just smiled and said, "Today is ours." But 3 hours later, my phone had 108 missed calls. The man who thought he had destroyed my career had just exposed something much bigger than office politics. Hidden revisions, missing approvals, construction records that could put real families at risk. I used to think silence made me professional, that if I stayed calm, worked harder, and didn't make trouble, people would eventually see my worth. But that wedding day taught me something painful. Some people don't mistake your silence for peace. They mistake it for permission. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Because this story starts with a wedding gift meant to humiliate me, but it ends with the truth that forced an entire company to answer for what it tried to hide. I had just said "I do" when my phone vibrated against my thigh. That should have been the last thing I noticed. The church doors had opened behind us, sunlight spilling over the old stone steps in uptown Charlotte. Maura's hand was tucked into mine. People were cheering. A little girl from her side of the family tossed flower petals so high they landed in my jacket pocket. My aunt called out, "Look at Khalil, finally relaxed." For one clean second, I believed her. Then my phone buzzed again. I almost let it go. A man should be able to walk out of his own wedding without checking a message. But I had spent too many years being the person people called when something went wrong. I glanced down. "Brian Winchester, you're fired. Consider it my wedding gift." I stopped walking. The laughter around me stretched into a strange, faraway noise. Maura took one more step before she felt my hand tighten. The photographer lowered his camera. Someone behind us said, "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. I read the message again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. There was no "call me," no explanation, no mistake. Just Brian, the boss's son, sending two sentences sharp enough to cut through a wedding veil. Brian had been my supervisor for only a few months. Before that, I reported to his father, Durham Winchester, the founder of Winchester Infrastructure Group. Durham was old school, demanding, yes, but fair. Brian was different. He wore confidence like a borrowed suit, too bright, too stiff, never quite fitting him. Still, I had tried to give him room. I had told myself, "He's learning." I had told myself, "Don't make trouble." I had told myself a lot of things men say when they've been trained to keep the peace. Then I looked up and saw Maura watching me. Not worried, not confused, just still. I stepped slightly away from the crowd, toward the side of the church steps where the spring wind moved through the dogwoods. I handed her my phone without a word. She read the message once. Her face didn't change. That unsettled me more than anger would have. She locked the screen, placed the phone back in my palm, and gently straightened my tie like we were still standing in front of the altar. Then she said, quiet enough for only me to hear, "Today is ours." I stared at her. "Maura, I just lost my job." "No," she said, "you received a message. That's not the same thing." There are moments in a marriage when love looks like romance, and there are moments when love looks like someone refusing to let you fall apart in public. That was the first lesson my wife gave me. Behind us, guests were still waiting. My mother was smiling too hard, the way she did when she sensed tension, but wanted everyone to pretend otherwise. My older brother Devlin stood near the curb, checking his phone, probably already impatient for the reception. I knew what my family would say if they saw the message. "Don't make a scene. Handle it later. Think about your future." All my life, I had been the youngest son who handled things later, the one who swallowed disappointment because somebody else's comfort came first. If the family needed a calm voice, I was expected to provide it. If someone needed money, a ride, a repair, a favor, they called me. And because I loved them, I showed up. But standing there in my wedding suit, with my new wife beside me, I felt something inside me bend. Not break, bend. Because losing the job hurt, yes. I won't pretend it didn't. I had built systems at that company with my own hands. I knew every project file, every permit tracker, every revision log. But what stung deeper was the timing. Brian hadn't just fired me. He had chosen the happiest hour of my life and tried to plant shame inside it. Maura touched my sleeve. "Your cufflink's loose." I looked down. One of my grandfather's silver cufflinks had turned sideways. He had given them to me years before he passed. Plain silver, no initials, just clean, solid, honest work. Maura fixed it carefully. Then she repeated something my grandfather used to tell me when I was young and trying too hard to be useful to everyone. A man is remembered by how he carries himself when life gets difficult. At the time, I thought she meant the wedding. I thought she was reminding me to stand tall for the pictures, smile for the guests, and not let Brian steal what belonged to us. So I took one breath, then another. I slid the phone into my pocket. Maura squeezed my hand, and together we walked down the church steps toward the waiting car. People clapped again. The photographer caught us smiling. In those pictures, you'd never know my career had just been threatened by a man too petty to wait until Monday. At the reception, music greeted us before we even entered the ballroom. The smell of roasted chicken, buttered rolls, and fresh flowers filled the hotel lobby. Guests hugged us. Someone pressed a glass of sparkling cider into my hand. Maura leaned close and whispered, "1 hour at a time." So that's what I did. One greeting, one photograph, one dance. I told myself I would deal with Brian tomorrow. I told myself a text message couldn't define my wedding day. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because 3 hours later, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating, and every missed call made one thing painfully clear. Brian had made a mistake far bigger than firing me. By the time dinner was served, I had almost convinced myself I could survive the evening without thinking about Brian Winchester. Almost. The ballroom was warm with candlelight. Maura's cousins were laughing near the dessert table. My uncle had already started telling the same fishing story he told at every family event. The DJ played something slow, and for a few minutes I let myself move with my wife, like the world outside that room had no claim on us. I danced with my mother. I thanked guests for coming. I smiled for photographs. I did what a husband is supposed to do on his wedding day. Then my cousin Tessa walked toward me, holding my phone like it was something fragile. "Khalil," she said, lowering her voice, "I think you need to see this." I took it from her, expecting maybe a few messages from work. Maybe Brian trying to make himself feel important. The screen told a different story. 108 missed calls. Not one, not five, 108. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face still. Years in project management teach you not to panic just because a screen looks ugly. I stepped toward the side hallway near the ballroom entrance. Maura followed without being asked. The calls weren't just from Brian, though his name appeared again and again. 17 times. There were calls from the executive office, legal, 2 senior engineers, a major developer, and a city inspection contact I knew by name. Then I saw the one that made me stop scrolling. Durham Winchester, Brian's father, the founder, the man who never called twice if one message would do. Maura looked at the screen, then at me, listened to his voicemail. We moved outside through a glass side door where the music softened behind us. The hotel lights reflected off the pavement. I pressed play. Durham's voice came through controlled, but thin around the edges. "Khalil, this is Durham. Call me immediately. Brian had no authority to terminate your employment. None. Do not answer Brian before you speak to me. Please." He said, "Please." Durham Winchester did not use that word unless something had gone badly wrong. The next message was worse. The compliance dashboard is locked. The redevelopment files aren't routing to engineering. We can't verify the latest revision package. Sterling Beck is threatening to suspend the contract before Monday. Another message. The city is asking about approval timestamps. No one here can explain the version history. Khalil, I need you to call me. I stood there in my wedding suit with the distant sound of applause leaking through the glass, realizing that the man who had tried to humiliate me had just exposed the one truth he never understood. I had not been important because of a title. I had been important because I knew how the machine worked. For 2 years, I had built that project system piece by piece. Permit tracking, engineering sign-offs, revision logs, client approvals, safety review notes. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody clapped when a file routed correctly. Nobody sent flowers because a compliance flag prevented a bad submission. But the work held things together, and Brian had spent months calling documentation overkill. He canceled training sessions because he said they were a waste of billable hours. He told people, "We need results, not hand-holding." He acted like knowing the system was the same thing as owning it. Now the whole company was learning the difference. My phone buzzed again. Brian. I watched his name appear, disappear, then appear once more. Maura stood beside me, quiet as ever. "Are you going to answer?" I thought about it. A part of me wanted to hear him stumble. Another part wanted to ask why he chose my wedding day. But the smarter part of me, the part that had kept projects alive under pressure, knew better. You don't respond before you understand the full problem. So I silenced the call. "I think this is bigger than being fired," I said. Maura's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. I know. That answer stayed with me. Not, "I think so," not, "maybe." I know. Before we went back inside, I looked at the phone one more time. Durham had left another voicemail, but I didn't play it yet. I wasn't going to let Winchester Infrastructure Group take another piece of my wedding night. I slid the phone into my pocket and reached for my wife's hand. Inside, the DJ announced the cake cutting. People cheered when we walked back in. To them, I was still the groom, still smiling, still steady, but something had shifted. I was no longer a man begging to understand why he had been thrown away. I was a man standing beside a locked door, slowly realizing I might be the only one with the key. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs had been there for months. I just kept convincing myself they weren't important enough to confront. I didn't sleep much after the reception. By the time the hotel grew quiet, Maura was resting beside me, one hand still loosely curled over the edge of the blanket. Her makeup was gone. Her hair was pinned halfway down. She looked peaceful in a way I envied. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, silent, still full of answers I wasn't ready to hear. Just before sunrise, I stepped onto the small balcony outside our room. Charlotte was waking up slowly below me. Delivery trucks moved through the streets. A few early runners passed under the streetlights. The city looked normal, which felt almost insulting. My life had shifted under my feet, and the skyline didn't care. I stood there with a cup of hotel coffee going cold in my hand and asked myself the first honest question I had asked since Brian's message. When did this really start? Not the firing. That was just the insult. The real trouble had started months earlier. I remembered the day Durham Winchester promoted Brian to department director. We were in the 10th floor conference room at Winchester Infrastructure Group. Everyone clapped. I clapped too. I meant it. Brian was the founder's son, sure, but I wanted him to succeed. A family company needs a next generation. I understood that. At first he acted eager. He asked questions. He laughed at the right moments. He told me, "Khalil, I'm going to lean on you while I get up to speed." I believed him. Then the invitations stopped coming. Leadership meetings moved from Tuesday mornings to closed executive sessions. Training sessions I had built for the compliance dashboard were canceled with 5-word emails. Not needed at this time. When clients complimented faster permit tracking, Brian smiled and said, "We've been modernizing." We. That word did a lot of heavy lifting. I told myself not to be petty. I told myself good work speaks for itself. That sounds noble until you realize silence can become a gift to people who steal credit with a smile. The first technical red flag came on a mixed-use project near South End. A drawing revision appeared in the system after the structural engineer had already signed off. Nothing huge at first glance. A changed reinforcement note. A material substitution. The kind of detail most executives wouldn't notice. But I noticed. That was my job. I walked into Brian's office with a printed copy and said, "This revision needs a second engineering review." He leaned back in his chair like I had interrupted his lunch. "Clients don't pay us for paperwork, Khalil. They pay us for results." I remember looking at him for a few seconds before answering. "Paperwork is how we prove the results won't hurt anyone." He smiled, but not kindly. "You've got to stop acting like you're the only adult in the building." After that, things changed faster. Budget approvals landed too quickly. Safety review meetings got shortened. Certain files skipped routing steps that had been in place for years. Every time I asked, Brian had an answer ready. "Don't overthink it. Corporate already knows." Durham approved the direction. That last one always made me hesitate. Durham trusted Brian. And if I challenged Brian too aggressively, I risked looking like the employee who couldn't accept new leadership. So I documented what I could, and I waited. Behind me, the balcony door opened. Maura stepped out in a robe, her voice still soft from sleep. "You're replaying it, aren't you?" I nodded. "All of it." She stood beside me, looking out at the morning traffic. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Did you suspect something before yesterday?" She didn't answer right away. That told me enough. "When your firm submitted the city package last month," she said, "I noticed a few timestamp issues. One PDF showed an engineer approval at 11:02 a.m., but the final revision was uploaded at 2:14 p.m. I turned toward her. "That means someone changed the file after sign-off." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't have proof of intent, not yet, and I didn't want to drop a grenade into your workplace based on instinct." She glanced at me. "But I saved copies. I also kept telling you not to delete revision history." I remembered that. At the time, I thought she was just being careful. Now it sounded like a warning bell I had chosen not to hear. Maura went back inside and returned with her tablet. She opened a folder and showed me 3 documents. Not enough to convict anyone of anything, but enough to make my stomach tighten. One file name stood out: Final Revision After Approval. No one names a file that unless they know exactly what line they crossed. I rubbed my thumb against the rim of the coffee cup, thinking through access permissions, routing logs, department credentials. My mind shifted into the calm, narrow focus I used during project crises. "Who had access after approval?" Maura asked. I didn't answer immediately, because I already knew the list was short, and Brian's department was on it. My phone buzzed from inside the room. We both looked toward the sound. A new voicemail from Durham. This time his voice wasn't desperate. It was lower, more careful. "Khalil, I reviewed the internal access reports. I think Brian may have hidden more from me than I understood. Do not call him back. Not yet." The message ended there. Maura and I stood in the quiet room, the tablet still glowing between us. The wedding day firing had been cruel. The missed calls had been embarrassing for them. But this was something else. If Brian had altered approved construction documents, he hadn't just tried to ruin my career. He had gambled with public safety to protect his own image. And the hardest part wasn't discovering what Brian might have done. It was realizing the people I expected to stand beside me were about to ask me to stay silent. By Sunday afternoon, the hotel room felt smaller than it had that morning. Maura and I had spent hours going over what we knew. Not in a panic, not in some dramatic rush, but the way adults do when the floor starts moving beneath them. One document at a time, one voicemail at a time, One fact that could be checked against another. The more I looked back, the more one question stayed with me. How many people had seen Brian crossing lines and decided it was safer to look away? I didn't expect the next answer to come from my own family. My father called just after lunch. His name, Randolph Mercer, lit up my phone while Maura was packing the wedding cards into a white envelope so they wouldn't get bent on the drive home. I stepped near the window and answered, "Hey, Dad." His voice was calm, too calm for a man whose youngest son had been fired on his wedding day. "So," he said, "what are you going to do about work?" Not, "How's Maura?" Not, "Are you all right?" Just work. I told him enough. The text, the missed calls, Durham's message, the system lockout, the possible document changes. I kept my voice steady because I had learned a long time ago that if I sounded upset, my family would focus on my tone instead of the problem. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "Khalil, sometimes the youngest son has to be the flexible one." I looked at my reflection in the hotel window, suit jacket hanging on the chair behind me, wedding band still new on my finger. "Flexible?" I asked. "You know what I mean. Don't turn this into a war. If Durham wants to make it right, let him. A man's got to think about stability." "Dad, Brian fired me at my wedding." "And that was wrong," he said quickly. "But don't burn every bridge you have just because your pride got bruised." That sentence landed harder than I expected. My pride. Brian had tried to humiliate me in front of my wife, freeze a public project, and maybe hide unsafe changes. But to my father, the danger was that I might make things uncomfortable. I ended the call politely. I even said, "I'll think about it," because old habits don't ask permission before showing up. An hour later, my brother Devlin called. Devlin was the kind of man who could make surrender sound like strategy. He worked in sales, drove a clean truck, and always spoke as if life rewarded the person who stayed closest to power. "I heard about the mess," he said. "That's one word for it. Listen, Brian's the owner's son. Guys like that don't really fall. They stumble, somebody catches them, and everyone moves on." I stayed quiet. He took that as agreement. "If Durham offers your job back, take it. Smile. Shake hands. Don't make your wedding the day you blow up your whole career." I turned away from the window. What if the files were changed after approval? Then let the company handle it. What if people get hurt? Devlin paused, then said the kind of thing people say when they want peace without paying for truth. "That's not your responsibility anymore." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the carpet pattern until it blurred. Maura came out of the bathroom, saw my face, and didn't ask a question right away. She just sat beside me. That was one of the things I loved about her. She didn't rush into fixing a wound before understanding where it was. Finally, she said, "Your father?" "And Devlin." She nodded. "What hurt more?" I almost said Brian. That would have been easier, cleaner. But the truth came out before I could dress it up. My father. Because Brian barely knew me. My father did. He knew I was the son who came early to set up chairs and stayed late to fold them. The one who drove Mom to appointments when Devlin was too busy. The one who heard, "You're easygoing," so often that I mistook it for a compliment. Maura rested her hand over mine. Keeping the peace isn't the same as keeping your self-respect. I looked down at my grandfather's silver cufflinks on the nightstand. One caught the afternoon light, plain and steady. My grandfather would never have made a speech out of it. He would have just looked at me and expected me to know the difference between patience and surrender. That night, I packed slowly, dress shoes in one bag, wedding cards in another. Maura folded her veil with more care than either of us had given the phone that kept buzzing on the dresser. Near midnight, Brian texted again. "You can still fix this if you stop making things difficult. No apology, no shame, just the same old trick. Make the person who was wronged feel responsible for the damage." I read it once and locked the screen. By Monday morning, as we rolled our luggage toward the elevator, I felt tired but clear. Not angry in the loud way, clear in the way a person gets when something finally becomes simple. I had spent too long proving my value to people who benefited from pretending not to see it. That ended now. In the lobby, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Brian, it was an unknown number. The message said only 3 words: "Don't delete anything." The message on my phone came with no name, no explanation, and no kindness wrapped around it. Don't delete anything. I showed it to Maura as we stood in the hotel lobby with our luggage beside us. She read it once, then looked toward the revolving doors as if whoever sent it might still be nearby. "Do you recognize the number?" she asked. No. A second message appeared before I could put the phone away. 10:30, Queen City Cafe, back booth. Come alone if you want, but bring someone you trust if you're smart. Maura looked at me. "Well," she said, "I suppose I'm someone you trust." Even then, she gave me a small smile. Not because any of this was funny, because she knew I needed to remember I wasn't walking into it alone. We checked out, loaded the car, and drove through late morning traffic toward a little cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy. The place smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls. A few retirees sat near the front window, talking about church and gas prices, like the world hadn't just tilted sideways for me. In the back booth sat Darnell Brodus. He was the senior IT director at Winchester Infrastructure Group, a quiet man with wire-frame glasses and a habit of answering questions with fewer words than most people use to order lunch. He had been with the company longer than Brian had been alive. In 3 weeks, he was supposed to retire. Darnell didn't stand when we approached. He only nodded toward the seat across from him. "Mr. Brodus," I said. "Khalil." His eyes moved to Maura. "Counselor." That told me he knew exactly who she was. He slid a plain black external hard drive across the table. No envelope, no drama. Just a small piece of plastic sitting between coffee cups and sugar packets. "I've spent 35 years protecting data," he said. "This morning, I'm protecting the truth." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Disaster Recovery Archive. Authorized backup logs. Nothing stolen. Nothing copied from a personal machine. Everything preserved under company retention policy." Maura leaned forward slightly. "Why bring this to us?" Darnell's mouth tightened. "Because Brian's been asking which logs can be cleaned up." That was his phrase, not mine. I felt my jaw set. He continued, "I told him archived system records don't work like a kitchen counter. You don't wipe them down and call them clean." "Why now?" I asked. He looked tired then, not scared. Tired in the way honest people get when they've spent too long watching careless people win. "Because you walked away with your name intact," he said, "and because I won't retire with a lie sitting on my desk." We didn't open the drive in the cafe. That would have been foolish. Maura wrapped it in a napkin, placed it in her purse, and thanked him in the calm voice she used when something mattered too much to rush. At home, we cleared the kitchen table before plugging anything in. Maura used an old laptop that had never touched Winchester's network. She checked the drive first, carefully, the way an attorney thinks before stepping onto thin ice. Inside were folders labeled by project code, date, and archive cycle. Then we found the one Darnell must have meant for me to see: Emergency Archive. Maura opened it. The first file showed login history: Brian's department credentials at 11:58 p.m., a structural revision uploaded hours after final engineering approval. Another file showed a deleted review note restored in backup. A third contained a routing change that skipped 2 required sign-offs. Piece by piece, the shape of it appeared. Not a mistake, a pattern. I stood behind Maura's chair, reading timestamps and project IDs, feeling my anger sharpen into something far more useful: clarity. Just then my phone rang. Mom. Lenora Mercer sounded relieved before I even said hello. "Honey, Your father told me Durham's been calling. Maybe that means this can all get worked out. Worked out. That phrase landed heavy. Mom, there may be serious safety issues. I'm not saying Brian handled it right, she said quickly. But you just got married. Don't start your marriage with a lawsuit hanging over your head. Sometimes you have to let people save face. There it was again. Save face. Keep quiet. Be reasonable. I looked at the hard drive on the table, then at my wife who had stopped typing and was listening without interrupting. Mom, I said carefully, did you call to ask if I'm okay? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Oh, Khalil, she said softly. Of course I care. I know you care, I said. That wasn't what I asked. After we hung up, I sat down slowly. The kitchen felt too quiet. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower started up, ordinary and steady, while my life sat open on a laptop screen in file names, in timestamps. That evening, after hours of sorting documents, exhaustion finally reached me. I closed the laptop. Maybe I should let it go, I said. Maura didn't react. She waited. If I walk away, none of this is mine anymore. Durham can fix his company. Brian can answer to his father. I can start over. Even saying it, I knew it sounded like surrender dressed as wisdom. Maura picked up the hard drive and reopened one folder I hadn't studied closely. It contained inspection notes for a mixed-use residential building. One structural revision had bypassed 2 engineering approvals. She turned the screen toward me. Khalil, she said, what if your silence becomes part of someone else's tragedy? The room changed after that. Not loudly, just completely. Because the question wasn't whether Brian had hurt me. He had. The question was whether I would protect myself by leaving other people exposed. I reached for the hard drive again, not because I wanted revenge, because I knew I could not build a new life on top of a truth I helped bury. The next morning, I made the decision that would cost me any chance of returning to Winchester Infrastructure Group, but it would also become the first real step toward reclaiming my life. By Wednesday morning, I stopped asking whether Winchester Infrastructure Group would take me back. That question had kept me tied to the same door Brian slammed in my face. So I changed it. If I never walked into that office again, what kind of man did I want to become? Maura and I sat at our small dining table with 2 cups of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the hard drive Darnell Brodus had trusted us with. Our wedding gifts were still stacked near the wall. Half the thank you cards had not been written. Life had not paused just because my career had turned into a battlefield. I don't want to compete with Winchester, I said. Maura clicked her pen. Then don't. I don't want to steal clients. Good. Build something cleaner. That was how Mercer Compliance Strategies began. Not in a glass office, not with investors. At our dining table, between a stack of wedding envelopes and a laptop that took too long to start. By late morning, we drove downtown to file the paperwork. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when she stamped the form. But to me, the sound felt heavier than a gavel. Mercer Compliance Strategies would focus on construction risk, permit integrity, revision control, and independent safety review. The exact work Brian had treated like a nuisance. When I signed my name, I thought about all the years I had built value under someone else's roof. Now the roof was mine. Small, uncertain, and not paid for yet, but mine. The first strike came that afternoon. A courier left a thick envelope at our door. Maura opened it at the kitchen counter while I stood beside her. The letterhead belonged to a law firm Winchester used whenever it wanted to sound more official than honest. The notice accused me of possessing confidential information. It demanded I stop contacting employees, return company materials, and cease using any proprietary methods developed at Winchester. I read all 7 pages without speaking. Then I handed it to Maura. She reached the end and gave a small, humorless smile. They're nervous. That's your legal opinion? That's my wife's opinion. My legal opinion is that this letter says more than they meant it to. She tapped the page. They're not asking what you have. They're assuming you have enough to scare them. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a folder. I had spent too much of my life responding to pressure with panic. This time, I chose procedure. Document the threat. Preserve the evidence. Do nothing reckless. That evening, just after 6, someone knocked on the front door. Maura looked through the peephole. It's a woman. When I opened the door, Shanann Cole stood on the porch, clutching a worn leather bag against her chest. She was a project coordinator at Winchester, sharp, careful, the kind of person who kept departments from falling apart while executives took credit for being organized. Khalil, she said, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry to come here. You're all right, I said. Come in. She stepped inside and glanced behind her before I closed the door. That one look told me everything about the atmosphere Brian had created. At the table, Maura offered tea. Shanann wrapped both hands around the mug, but didn't drink. Brian told us to process documents before engineering reviews were complete, she said. At first, he called it pre-routing, said approvals were coming anyway. I didn't interrupt. Then he started saying things like, don't make me explain to Durham why you slowed down a multi-million-dollar project, or some people here should be grateful they still have jobs. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I questioned him twice. The second time he closed his office door and said, you're not paid to protect Khalil's little system. You're paid to move files. Maura's expression stayed calm, but I saw her fingers tighten around her pen. Shanann reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I kept notes, not because I planned to do anything. I was just scared he'd blame me someday. Inside were dates, meeting times, project codes, and short, handwritten lines. BR said route before final review. BR said Durham wants speed. BR told team not to copy Khalil. Ordinary notes, the kind nobody notices until the truth needs witnesses. I compared 3 dates to the backup logs Darnell had given me. They matched. Not perfectly by accident, precisely. That was the moment the room changed. We were no longer looking at one cruel text, one bad supervisor, or one ugly family company power play. We were looking at a pattern. Shanann wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed by her own tears. I should have said something sooner. I shook my head. You're saying it now. After she left, Maura and I sat in the quiet kitchen with the folder between us. The furniture didn't match. The wall near the window still needed painting. Mercer compliance strategies existed mostly as a stamped form and a promise. But it was honest. Late that night, Maura asked, if Durham offered you your old position tomorrow, would you take it? A week earlier, I would have answered before she finished the sentence. Security is a powerful temptation. So is being wanted after being discarded. But I looked at the legal letter, Shanann's notes, and Darnell's drive. Then I looked at my wife. No, I said. If I go back just to feel safe again, Brian wins in a different way. Maura nodded once. I opened a clean folder and wrote the first label for my new company. Public Safety Review. My hand was steady. For the first time since the wedding, I was not trying to recover the life Brian interrupted. I was building one he could not control. And just when I thought I had finally taken hold of my future, Brian made his most dangerous move yet. He decided to destroy my reputation before I could expose the truth. By the following Friday, my name had started moving through Charlotte's construction circles in a way I could feel before I could prove. A developer who had sounded eager on Wednesday suddenly postponed our call. A city contact who had known me for years replied with one careful sentence. Let's circle back after things settle. Even a former vendor, a man who once told me I was the only reason Winchester's project stayed organized, let my call go to voicemail. People were not asking me what happened. They were stepping back from whatever they thought had happened. That morning, Durham Winchester called again. I watched his name sit on the screen while Maura poured coffee in the kitchen. I had ignored him enough times to prove a point. Now I needed information. So I answered. Khalil, he said, and the heaviness in his voice surprised me. "Would you meet me? No attorneys, no executive team, just us." An hour later, I sat across from him in his private office. The room looked the same as it always had: framed project photos, polished table, skyline view, but Durham did not. His suit was neat, yet he seemed smaller inside it. He didn't offer excuses. That was the first thing I noticed. "I trusted my son more than the systems you built," he said. I kept my hands folded on my lap. "Yes, sir, you did." He looked toward the window. "And I may have endangered people because of it." That sentence cost him something. I could hear it. For a moment, I didn't see the founder of Winchester Infrastructure Group. I saw a father who had confused protecting his son with leading his company. I felt pity, but not enough to confuse it with forgiveness. "Durham," I said, "this cannot be fixed by rehiring me." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." Before I left, he asked one question. "What do you have?" I answered carefully. "Enough to know this belongs in the hands of people with authority." He nodded, but fear moved across his face before he could hide it. By late afternoon, I understood why my calls had gone cold. Maura found it first. A client forwarded her an email chain with a short note attached. "Thought you should be aware." The emails looked real because parts of them were real. That was the dangerous part. Brian had not invented everything from nothing. He had taken old messages about system exports, removed context, trimmed replies, and arranged them to suggest I had copied proprietary information before leaving. No direct accusation, no clear lie, just enough smoke to make honest people step away from the fire. Maura read through the pages twice. "He's not trying to prove you stole anything. He's trying to make people wonder." She nodded. "And doubt is cheaper than evidence." One paragraph made my hands go still. "Khalil has always insisted only he understands the compliance platform. That dependency should concern all of us." I recognized the sentence. Brian had written it months before my wedding. Back then, I thought he was being insecure. Now he was using it to paint me as a man who had planned a takeover. By 5 o'clock, 2 introductory meetings for Mercer compliance strategies were canceled. One project owner sent a polite message saying they needed to avoid reputational risk. I read that phrase 3 times. Reputational risk. Brian had fired me on my wedding day, compromised documents, pressured employees, and now I was the risk. That evening, I sat alone in our little home office after Maura went to take a call in the living room. The legal notice sat in one folder, Darnell's Drive in another. Shanann's notes were spread beside them, ordinary ink on ordinary paper, holding extraordinary weight. For the first time, I let myself consider the damage beyond me. Winchester had hundreds of employees, receptionists, drafters, junior engineers, payroll clerks, people with mortgages, prescriptions, children in college, aging parents. If I handed everything over, the company could lose contracts. Innocent families could suffer. If I stayed quiet, Brian's shortcuts could become someone else's disaster. There was no clean choice. I leaned back and whispered into the room, "What if doing the right thing hurts the wrong people?" Maura heard me from the doorway. She didn't answer with a speech. She came in, placed one document on the desk, and turned it toward me. It was a structural review from the mixed-use building we had flagged. A reinforcement specification had been reduced after engineering approval. Not a typo, not a formatting error, a meaningful change. "If that building has problems 10 years from now," she said, "who will know we saw this and said nothing?" I looked at the page until the numbers stopped being numbers. They became people. A grandmother taking an elevator, a father pushing a stroller through a lobby, a maintenance worker trusting the floor beneath his boots. That was when the fight finally changed. It was not about getting my job back. It was not about proving Brian was small. It was about refusing to let silence become part of the structure. The next morning, Maura and I drove to the Charlotte Municipal Building. We parked 2 blocks away and walked in with one sealed evidence packet, one indexed flash drive, In a written summary, Maura helped me prepare so no one could say I acted out of emotion. A compliance investigator named Keziah Rowe met us in a plain conference room. She was professional, direct, and patient in the way serious people are when they already know a situation is worse than it sounds. I gave her the backup logs, the revision histories, Shanann's notes, and the email chain Brian had circulated. Then I said the only sentence that mattered. I'm not here to destroy a company. I'm here to prevent an unsafe building. Keziah looked at me for a long moment, then closed the folder. We'll take it from here. When Maura and I stepped back outside, the morning air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but no longer mine alone to carry. I thought the hardest decision was behind me. I was wrong. Brian still had one final move, and it nearly destroyed everything I had rebuilt. 3 weeks passed before the State Construction Safety Board called us in. I expected the process to move like most government matters, slowly, carefully, with plenty of silence in between. But safety concerns changed the pace. Once Keziah Rowe and her team compared Darnell's backups with the city's permit archive, the quiet ended. The hearing was held in a plain room downtown. No cameras, no audience looking for entertainment, just investigators, attorneys, company representatives, and people who understood that one bad signature can put hundreds of lives at risk. Maura sat beside me. I adjusted one cufflink before we walked in, more out of habit than nerves. My grandfather's old silver caught the light, and for a second I remembered him saying, "A man is remembered by how he carries himself when life gets difficult." I was ready for questions. I was not ready for Brian's last move. Minutes before the hearing began, his attorney stood and introduced what he called newly discovered context. Printed emails, spreadsheets, internal memos, a neat little stack meant to tell one ugly story. According to them, I had planned to leave Winchester Infrastructure Group months before the wedding. I had built the compliance platform so only I could manage it. I had created dependency, then walked away with knowledge the company needed. The room went quiet. Even Durham looked stunned. Brian sat across from me in a navy suit, chin raised, eyes fixed forward. He didn't look sorry. He looked like a man betting everything on one final hand. For a few minutes it worked. One investigator asked me whether the emails were real. "Parts of them are," I said. "The order and missing context are the problem." Brian's attorney leaned back as if that answer helped him. Then Keziah turned to Brian. "Mr. Winchester, please explain how user-level export logs differ from administrative archive logs." Brian blinked. "That's more of an IT distinction," he said. "It is central to your claim." He adjusted his tie. "The point is Mr. Mercer controlled the system." Keziah did not raise her voice. "That was not my question." A second investigator asked which access tier could alter routing after engineering approval. Brian gave an answer that contradicted his own memo. A third question followed about automatic timestamp preservation. He guessed again. And that was when the room shifted. No one had shouted. No one had given a speech. Brian simply did not understand the system he claimed I had manipulated. His arrogance became the witness against him. Then Maura was asked to clarify the city records. She stood, not as my wife, but as a compliance attorney who knew exactly where the permanent records lived. She explained that Charlotte's digital permit archive preserved every submitted engineering revision with timestamps, approval sequences, and user origin trails. Company emails could be trimmed. City records could not be rewritten after submission. She laid the comparison out cleanly. Engineering approval at 11:02 a.m., revised structural file uploaded at 2:14 p.m., review note removed from company workflow, same note preserved in city archive, department access tied to Brian's group. One by one, the facts lined up. Brian stopped looking confident. Durham lowered his head. After a short recess, the board returned with preliminary findings. The downtown redevelopment project was suspended pending full structural review. Winchester lost authority to lead corrective compliance work until outside oversight was approved. Brian's license was referred for disciplinary review, and several violations were forwarded for possible civil action. I felt relief but not joy. Joy would have meant I wanted this. I didn't. Outside the hearing room, Durham approached me slowly. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "I only want a chance to repair what my decisions helped destroy." Then he asked if Mercer Compliance Strategies would consider serving as an independent compliance partner if Winchester ever earned the city's trust again. I looked past him at Brian, standing alone near the wall, finally out of people to hide behind. I touched my cufflink without thinking. Brian had called his text a wedding gift. He had meant humiliation. But the real gift was losing the illusion that my future depended on people who never valued my integrity. Winning the case was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of learning whether broken people and broken institutions could ever truly change. A year can change the shape of a life. Not always in the loud ways people expect. Sometimes it happens through small, steady choices. A calendar filling with honest work. A house becoming a home. A name you once defended becoming something you no longer need to explain. That morning, I drove past the downtown redevelopment district on my way to the office. The same project that had nearly collapsed under shortcuts now had cafes on the corner, families crossing the sidewalks, and a small park where children chased one another between benches. I pulled over for a minute, not because I wanted to admire my victory. I had learned not to call it that. Victory makes it sound like the point was beating Brian. It wasn't. The point was that people could walk into those buildings without trusting a lie. Mercer Compliance Strategies had grown faster than Maura and I expected. We started at our dining table with mismatched chairs and one stubborn belief: safety should never depend on who has the louder last name. By that next spring, we had a real office, 6 employees, and clients across 3 states. Young engineers came to us because they wanted to work somewhere that didn't treat ethics like a delay. Every time one of them said that, I thought about Brian laughing in his office. Clients don't pay us for paperwork. They pay us for results. He had been wrong about that. The right paperwork is often what keeps people alive long after the ribbon-cutting pictures are forgotten. Late that afternoon, my assistant brought a cream-colored envelope into my office. "No return address," she said, "but I think you'll know the handwriting." I did. Durham Winchester. His letter was written by hand, which surprised me. Men like Durham usually let lawyers turn regret into careful language. This wasn't that. He thanked me for refusing to protect what his company had done wrong. He wrote that losing contracts had humbled him, but losing his employees' trust had changed him. Near the end, one sentence made me set the paper down. Leadership isn't measured by how well you defend your family. It's measured by whether you hold them to the same standard as everyone else. At the bottom, he asked me to visit Winchester Infrastructure Group, not as an employee, as an independent advisor. I went 2 days later. Walking back into that building felt strange. The lobby smelled the same, polished floors and fresh coffee, but I was not the same man who used to hurry through those doors, hoping my work would finally speak loudly enough. Durham met me in the conference room. His handshake was firmer than his eyes. Brian was there too. He no longer carried himself like the room belonged to him. His professional license was still under review. He wasn't allowed to approve engineering documents. He worked under supervision now, reviewing compliance checklists line by line, doing the kind of work he once mocked. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Brian looked at me and said, "I thought taking your job would prove I mattered." He stopped, searching for words that did not come easily. All it proved was how little I understood the damage I was doing. I wanted to feel satisfied hearing that. Instead, I felt tired in an old, quiet way. "I hope you change, Brian," I said. "But trust doesn't return because you admit what happened. It returns through years of different choices." He nodded. No argument, no smirk. That was the closest thing to growth I had seen from him, but I did not confuse a beginning with a finish. Before I left, Durham handed me a small box. Inside was my old Winchester nameplate. Khalil Mercer, Senior Project Manager. Someone had kept it after Brian ordered my office cleared. "I thought you should decide what happens to it," Durham said. I held it for a moment, then set it back on the table. "That belonged to the man who thought he needed this place to prove his value," I said. "I don't need it anymore." That evening, Maura and I walked through the completed district just as the sun settled behind the skyline. I wore my grandfather's silver cufflinks, the same ones from our wedding day. They had stayed with me through every hearing, every letter, every hard decision. They were never Brian's to take and never his to return. Maura slipped her hand into mine. "You're quiet," she said. "I was thinking about the gift." She smiled. "The one he meant as an insult?" "Yes," I said, "except it didn't become what he wanted. Because Brian had tried to give me humiliation. Instead, he gave me the end of an illusion. I no longer believed my future belonged to people who only valued me when I was useful. I no longer measured peace by how much of myself I could swallow to keep others comfortable." My phone buzzed once. A message from Brian. "Thank you for not becoming the man I expected you to be." I read it, then put the phone away without replying right then. Some messages don't need immediate answers. Some are better answered by how you live. Across the park, a professor walked with a group of engineering students, pointing toward the restored building. "Study this project," he told them. "It changed how compliance review is handled across the state." None of them knew who I was. That was all right. Maura squeezed my hand, and we kept walking. Some victories don't arrive with applause. They arrive in quiet streets, safer buildings, honest work, and the peace of knowing you did not let bitterness decide who you became. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Sometimes the moment that feels like the end of your life is only the moment your life stops belonging to people who never deserve that power.